All right, we're at tutorial 10, and we're going to start right now on functions. And thank you for coming, and for those on the replay as well, the live stream, please like, share, and subscribe.
Here's the solution from the last tutorial where we created an emoji converter. Now, so far we've been writing all our code right here in app.py, but as our programs grow, we need a better way to organize our code. We need to break up our code into smaller, more manageable, and more maintainable chunks, which we call functions. So a function is a container for a few lines of code that perform a specific task. For example, you have learned about a few of the built-in functions in Python like print and input. Each of these functions have a purpose. They know how to perform a specific task. So when building large, complex programs, we should break up our code into smaller, reusable chunks, which we call functions, to better organize our code. And that's what I'm going to show you in this tutorial. So let's write a simple program for printing a greeting message. So we're going to do a print, hi there, and let's add another message, welcome aboard. So here we have a simple program with only 2 lines of code. Now let's say these 2 lines, potentially we're going to need them in other programs. So we can put them in a function that we can reuse. Let me show you how to do that. So we start typing out def, that is a reserved keyword in Python, and it's short for define. When Python interpreter sees this, it knows that we're defining a function. Next, we need to give our function a name. Let's say greet underline user. So all the best practices you learn about naming your variables also apply here, which means you should name your functions with lowercase characters. If there are multiple words, you need to separate them using an underscore. And you should always, 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 always use meaningful and descriptive names for your functions. So here we're defining a function called greetUser. After that, we need to add parentheses followed by a colon. Now, you know that whenever we add a colon at the end of a line, we're telling Python that we're defining a block of code. So when we press enter, the next line is indented. Now, any code that we write here will belong to this function. So I'm going to move these 2 lines, these 2 print statements inside of our function. We can simply press tab to indent them. Beautiful. Also, let's remove this extra line break. That is better. So these 2 lines now are part of our greet user function. So whenever we call this function, these 2 lines will be executed. Okay. Now let's remove indentation. So here we are outside of our function. Let's do a print statement and print start. After that, let's call our function. So greet user. And finally, let's do another print statement and print finish. Now we
So as a matter of fact, I think we went over this at the last tutorial, so I'm going to go ahead and fast forward this a little bit. Yeah, actually we did. So I'm going to go ahead and jump forward. Yep, let's print square. Let's do the emoji retest. Try, yep. All right, so let's see where we're at here. All right.
box to handle exceptions that are raised in our programs. As a good programmer, you should always anticipate these kind of exceptions and handle them properly.
Okay, yeah, so we'll start here at comments.
In this tutorial, I'm going to talk to you guys about comments in Python. We use comments to add notes or comments to our programs. For example, here I'm going to make a print statement. Sky is blue. Now, before that, I can add a comment using a hash sign, and then whatever I type here is going to get ignored. It's not going to get executed. Let me show you. So let's run this program. Look, we only see this message, sky is blue. So with this comment, we can explain something about our code. We can use that as reminders to fix things or clean things up, or we can use it to communicate things with other developers reading our code. Why we have written this code in a certain way. These are good use cases for using comments. We can also have comments over multiple lines. So we can simply add more comments. Each line should start with a new high sign. Now, one thing you need to avoid when using comments is explaining what the code does. So here's an example of a bad comment. Let me just delete these 2 lines. And with this comment, I'm going to say print sky is blue. Why is this a bad comment? Because it's telling me the obvious. It is obvious that the next line is going to print sky is blue. Now, the problem with this comment is that apart from being verbose and repetitive, if we come back here and change sky to ocean, now this comment gets outdated. So every time we change this code, then we'll have to come back and modify the corresponding comment. So I've seen some developers add comments in front of their functions. For example, they define a function, let's say square, that takes a number and simply returns number times number. Well, it is obvious that this function calculates and returns the square of the given number. So there is really no need to add a comment and explain that. Calculates and returns the square of a number. This is very repetitive and it creates noise in your code. Someone else reading your code, they get distracted with all these unnecessary comments. So use comments to explain whys and hows, not whats. If you have made certain assumptions, you can use comments to explain those assumptions, or you can use them to add notes to remind yourself or other developers to do something in the code. So comments are good, but too much of a good thing is a bad thing. In this tutorial, I'm going to talk to you guys about classes in Python. Classes are extremely important in programming, and they're not specific to Python. In fact, a lot of other programming languages do support the notion of classes. We use classes to define new types. For example, so far, you have learned about the basic types in Python, like numbers, strings, and booleans. These are the basic or simple types in Python. You also learn about a couple of complex types, like lists and dictionaries. While these types are extremely useful, they cannot always be used to model complex concepts. For example, think of the concept of a point or a shopping cart. A shopping cart is not a Boolean. It's not a list. It's not a dictionary. It's a different kind of thing. So we can use classes to define new types to model real concepts. Now, in this tutorial, I'm going to show you how to define a new type called point. And this new type is going to have methods for working with points. For example, back to our main program, let's create a list, numbers, 1, 2, 3. You know that here, when we type dot, we get access to these functions or methods available in list objects. Now, similar to this, we're going to create a new type called point. This point is going to have methods like move, draw, get, distance from another point. These are the operations that we can perform on points. So let me show you how to do this. We start by defining a class using the class keyword. And right after that, we give our class a name. Now look at the naming convention I have used here. I've capitalized the first letter here. This is what we call Pascal naming convention. So the convention we use for naming our classes is different from the convention we use for naming our variables and functions. For variables and functions, we always use lowercase letters, and we separate multiple words using an underscore. But when naming classes, we don't use an underscore to separate multiple words. Instead, we capitalize the first letter of every word. So in this case, our class has only a single word. If it had multiple words, let's say email client, look, I've capitalized the first letter of every word. Once again, this is called Pascal naming convention, and it comes from the old Pascal language that you might have heard of. So back to our point class. Here we add a colon, which means we're going to define a block. Now, in this block, we can define all the functions or methods that belong to points. For example, we can define a function called move for moving a point. Now, note that as soon as we type open parentheses, PyCharm automatically adds self here. This is a special keyword, and we're going to get back to this shortly. So for now, in this method, let's print move on the terminal. Now let's define another method like draw. So define draw. And in this method, let's print draw on the terminal. Now let's remove the indentation. we are done with the definition of our point class. So we need to add 2 line breaks. Okay? So with this class, we defined a new type. With this new type, we can create new objects. So an object is an instance of a class. A class simply defines the blueprint or the template for creating objects, and objects are the actual instances based on that blueprint. So we could have tens or hundreds of points on the screen. These are the objects or the instances. So to create an object, we type out the name of our class and then call it like a function. This creates a new object and then returns it. So we can store that object in a variable. Let's call that point1. There you go. Now, when we use the dot operator, look, we have these 2 methods that we defined, draw and move. We also have a bunch of other methods that start with 2 underscores. These are called magic methods. We'll look at them later in the course. So now let's call the draw method of our point object and run our program. So you can see draw is printed on the terminal. Now, apart from methods, these objects can also have attributes, and these attributes are like variables that belong to a particular object. For example, here, after we define point1, we can set point1.x to 10 and point1.y to 20. Now we can easily print out these attributes. Let's print point1.x and run our program one more time. Take a look. So the x coordinate of point1 is 10. Now we can create another object. Let's call that point2. So point2, once again, we type out the name of our class and then call it like a function. Now this object is completely different from the first object. So if we print point2.x, look, we get this attribute error because this point object doesn't have an attribute called x. So each object is a different instance of our point class. Now here we can assign a value to point2.x. Let's set that to 1 and then run our program. So we can see the x coordinate of point2 is 1. So to recap, we use classes to define new types. These types can have methods that we define in the body of the class, and they can also have attributes that we can set anywhere in our programs. You have learned how to create new types using classes. Now, there is a tiny problem in this implementation. We can create a point object without an x or y coordinates. Let me show you. So point, we create this object here. And before we set point.x, let's print point.x. Run our program. We get this attribute error that you saw in the last tutorial. So point object has no attribute called x. This is the problem we have here. It is possible to have a point object without an x or y coordinates. And that doesn't really make sense because whenever we talk about a point, we need to know where that point is located. To solve this problem, we use a constructor. A constructor is a function that gets called at the time of creating an object. So here on line 9, when creating this point object, we want to pass values for x and y coordinates, let's say 10 and 20. And with this point object that we get here will have its x and y coordinates initialized. So how do we do this? We need to add a special method in this class called constructor. So on the top, we define a new function. Look at the name of this function, _, init, _. So init is short for initialize. And this is the function or the method that gets called when we create a new point object. Now, press enter. So this automatically adds self in parentheses. We're going to come back to this shortly. Now, right after self, we want to add 2 extra parameters, x and y. So let's type out x and y. And then in the body of this method, we should read the values passed here and use them to initialize our object. So when we pass 10 and 20, these arguments will be used for x and y parameters. Now to initialize our object, we type out code like this, self.x equals x, and then self.y equals y. What is going on here? This self that you see here is a reference to the current object. So back to line 13, when we create a new point object, self references that object in memory, the same object that we're referencing using this variable. So earlier we typed point.x equals 10. With this code, we set the x attribute of this point object. Now what we have in the constructor is exactly the same. We're using self to reference the current object, and then we set the x attribute to the x argument passed to this function. So using this init method, we can initialize our objects, and we refer to this method as a constructor. This method is used to construct or create an object, okay? So now let's remove line 14. So we create a point object with these values and then print point.x. Let's run our program. There you go. X is 10. We can also change these values later. So just before printing point.x, we can set point.x to 11 and then run our program. So x is updated. Beautiful. All right, here's an exercise for you. I want you to define a new type called person. These person objects should have a name attribute as well as a talk method. This is a very easy exercise, so you can tackle it in probably a couple of minutes. All right, so first we start with the class keyword. We define this person class. Once again, look at the naming convention I have used here. The first letter of the first word, in this case, the only word, is uppercase.
All right, so we're going to start there. Class case. Oh.
Now, in this class, we define all the methods that we need. Currently, we have only one method, that is the talk method. So define talk. PyCharm automatically adds self. We
Define talk. Right.
come back to this shortly. For now, let's just print talk. So this is the body of our person class. We remove the indentation and add 2-line breaks after defining our classes.
Print talk.
Now we can create a person object. Let's call that John. We set it to person. We can call John.talk. Let's run the program. So we get this message, beautiful.
All right, John. Person. And John talk. Right. Program. Right.
But our person objects should also have a name attribute. It doesn't make sense to have a person without a name. So that is when we use the constructor function. So on the top, we add a new method. The name of this method is _init _. So we call this method a constructor. Now, in this method, we need to add another parameter that is name. So we simply set self.name to name. Once again, self references the current object. So we're setting the name attribute of the current object to the name argument passed to this method. With this, we can go back to line 9. And when creating a person object, we pass the name. Let's say John Smith. Now let's print john.name.
All right, so John Smith should be on line 9. Okay, 4. Okay. All right.
And run our program. There you go. So John Smith is printed on the terminal. Beautiful. So this is all you had to do as part of this exercise. But let's make this program a little bit more interesting. Instead of printing this boring message here, let's print, "Hi, I am John Smith." So we can use a formatted string with a message like, "Hi, I am." Now we want to dynamically add the name of this person. How do we do that? Well, look at the parameter of this talk method. As I told you before, every method in our class should have this parameter, self. And this should be the very first parameter of every method, okay? So with this self, we can get reference to the current object. So we can add curly braces and type out self.name. This returns the name attribute of the current person object. With this, we can remove line 10, where we print john.name.
All right. Line 6. Print. This is self.name. All right. Brackets. Okay.
And simply call john.talk. Let's run our program. "Hi, I am John Smith." Beautiful. Now we can create another person object. Let's say Bob is a new person called Bob Smith. When we say bob.talk and run our program, we get a different message. "Hi."
All right. Line 12 is Bob person. Bob Smith. All right. Bob talk. Okay.
"Hi, I'm Bob Smith." So each object is a different instance of a person class.
Okay, so we're actually going to stop a little bit earlier today. And what I'm thinking about doing, just because of time and my current time commitment going forward, I might actually be posting these, like pre-recording them and posting them. So if so, I will let you know. But regardless, please take a look at the posts to look to see what you can learn, and then reference the material. You'll actually be able to reference my video and this video, and I think the pre-recorded versions actually might be a little bit more constructive, because I might actually be putting some additional information, because I know some of these terms, even for myself, like when he talks about objects, I know he really didn't explain exactly what an object is and actually what it does, because I know in some applications, like when building websites, there's actually a particular like real life use case for objects when like you see on the website, oh, you're like, okay, that's what it does. So if I happen to run across some information, I'm gonna go ahead and put that in. Um, so I'll probably be starting it like next week, where you're probably going to be seeing some more pre-recorded information. If I can go live, I will. But if not, be looking out for the post. So the next post will be tutorial 11. And now, if you haven't seen tutorial 9A, and if you're interested, go back and check out 9A, because that's dealing with inserting emojis, which is basically on a PC using your Windows function. So definitely go ahead and check that out. So that's 9A. So anyway, thanks again. Today is, let's see, Friday, June 16th. And be looking out for more content. I know we have the reparations task force that's coming up on June 29th. So be on the lookout for the PSA, public service announcement on that. And I guess happy Juneteenth to everyone. We're actually going to be, I think on Juneteenth. Yep, on Juneteenth, we're going to be releasing the documentary Reparations Now. And for those who are listening and don't know, in the Mass Media Group, we actually traveled from Weed all the way down to San Diego, not only talking to the Black descendant community here in California, but also following the task force, which actually is the bill called AB 3121, which is the bill, California bill, to study and develop reparations for Black descendants here in California. So be on the lookout for that. And you can actually pre-order the video right now at reparationsnowdoc.com. That's reparationsnowdoc.com. So on that note, everyone, thanks once again. Hopefully this will be of some assistance to you in your future, so you can learn and use Python in any instance. May that be possibly getting a job for you, or you might be volunteering, or eventually you might need to parcel out some data or anything like that. So everybody have a great weekend. Happy Juneteenth, and we'll be seeing each other on the next video. Please like, share, and subscribe.